Once again, I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, and we're talking about the hydrogen economy and Alberta's opportunity. We've got a number of special guests today, and what I'm interested in understanding is how it is that we went from having hydrogen be one of those aspirational type of technologies that everyone has been talking about for years. So all of a sudden, everyone's talking about it in a real way, like it's going to be implemented and that it's going to be transformative to the economy. I'm kind of curious of knowing how that changed all of a sudden. Brent Lakeman is with Edmonton Global, which is an Edmonton-based economic development agency, and he's the resident expert there on the hydrogen economy. And he's going to join us now to tell us a little bit about why it is that it seems like hydrogen is now coming into its own. Brent, thanks so much for being with us today.
Great. No, thank you for having me. That's a great question. I think I've heard that hydrogen's been the fuel of the future, but it's been the fuel of the future probably for the last 50 years. And it was, always interesting. It always seemed a little bit further out there, fuel cells and so on. But, I think my view of why it's a hot topic right now is probably due to a number of factors. One, I think it's the net zero commitments that governments around the world and companies are starting to make, and trying to realize, how do we get there to net zero? It's great to talk about it, but let's have that plan in place. So when you start to look at, what you can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, certainly you can do a lot to green the grid, use renewable electricity to a greater extent. And we made great progress. The costs have come down dramatically for some of those technologies, but that only gets you so far. And the numbers we've seen, certainly within Canada, is you still have about 30% of your emissions that can't be electrified that easily. So for example, long haul, heavy duty truck transportation, electric technology, they might work for some of the smaller vehicles, but not so well for those trucks that have to be going back and forth on the highways almost 24/7. So you need a different type of energy solution. Heavy industry, they can't necessarily use electricity all that well either. So steel manufacturing, cement production, anything requires really high heating needs. So you need other technologies. So hydrogen becomes a very attractive technology. And we know how to do that. We've been producing hydrogen here, manufacturing hydrogen for use in our key industries in Alberta for a long time, for oil sands upgrading, for chemical use. And now we also have attractive assets like CO2 storage capabilities through projects like Shell Quest, the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. So it really brings together some key assets that allow, certainly in Alberta, to produce hydrogen in a very cost-effective manner compared to other alternatives. And we're seeing a global effort to really go down that hydrogen roadmap, hydrogen pathway, using renewable technologies as well. But again, from the provincial perspective, we've got some really incredible assets here, some experience, some talent that allows us to really be a very early mover in hydrogen. So it's really been some of those forces all coming together over the past several years. Greenhouse gas emission regulations and standards certainly help drive you towards this as well and make it even more economic. So, we've got our engineers saying, we can already, hydrogen can be quite economic in heavy duty truck transportation compared to diesel fuels. We just have some challenges around the infrastructure to start producing that hydrogen and getting it into the right places.
All right, Brent, let's bring in Minister Dale Nally. He is the Minister of Electricity and Natural Gas. This falls into his department, although I think everybody wants to be talking about hydrogen these days. Minister, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's nice to be here, Danielle.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about how hydrogen got onto the provincial radar screen, because it seems like things are moving quite quickly. But tell us about how you first learned about hydrogen and the opportunity for Alberta.
Listen, I think that hydrogen is one of the fuels of the future, and I can tell you there's a lot of jurisdictions right now that are not just interested in GHG reductions, Danielle, but they're making commitments to net zero by 2050, and they really have no plan on how they're going to get there. I got to tell you, hydrogen is a big part of that plan. It is going to allow us to be global leaders in a clean, affordable energy. And hydrogen is going to be absolutely an important part of that mix. So we're quite excited about it.
So I know you've got a chart that you want to show me, because I think it's important for us to understand just how many aspects of the economy it really, that hydrogen provides a solution for. So I want to share this, and hopefully you can speak to the issues on it so that we know just exactly where. That's not the right one. Here it is. I think this is the right one. Have you got it? No. Let me try this again. I tried this earlier to make sure that I had managed all of the all of the technical difficulties and making sure that I got it up. I went and showed you my email inbox instead.
I can start talking through there's really 5 areas if you want me to start talking through.
Yeah, please go ahead.
And one of them is residential and commercial heating. Hydrogen is when you use CCUS, it's essentially it is a clean fuel. When at ignition, it's a zero carbon fuel, so it's absolutely perfect for residential and commercial heating. And ATCO right now is exploring blending it in with natural gas to reduce GHGs. And you probably saw the exciting announcement that we saw just a few days ago from ATCO and Suncor, and they will be building a significant facility of which 20% of the hydrogen from that facility will be used for blending into natural gas. And they're going to be piloting that into Fort Saskatchewan. So we're quite excited about that, but also there's applications for power generation as well. Exports, this is without a doubt, Danielle, this is the big prize. Our experts are telling us that hydrogen will be a $2.5 trillion industry by 2050. And we right now are global leaders in hydrogen production. We're not global leaders in blue hydrogen just yet, but we will be. And this project that ATCO and Suncor announced is a big part of that. I can tell you that there are global companies that are looking at Alberta as a destination to produce hydrogen for export. And one of the things that they like is that we're not just leaders in hydrogen production now, but they love our geology. We have wonderful geology for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we're also global leaders and experts in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So we're an incredible destination to produce hydrogen for export, and companies are looking at us right now. So it's quite exciting. Mobility, as Brent already mentioned, is a very exciting opportunity. And we're going to be piloting 2 long-haul trucks between Edmonton and Calgary that will be fueled by hydrogen. And it's not a first. We know that California is operating 7,000 hydrogen vehicles in California. There's hydrogen buses in BC. This is an exciting opportunity because we know right now that EVs, as exciting as they are, our electricity system, our electricity grid is not in a position to be able to accommodate mass adoption of EVs. But hydrogen is absolutely an opportunity that will allow us to provide clean mobility and in a manner that's scalable for everyone. So it's quite exciting. And then, of course, in industrial processes as well, a huge opportunity for hydrogen. So we are very excited. The challenge that we have, Danielle, is you can't go all in on one, because we need to make incremental advancements in all of these different areas if we're going to move forward with the hydrogen industry. For example, if you were to go all in on just one of these and let's say the exports, and you build the pipeline and you do the production, but if you don't have the offtake agreements and the demand in Asia for it, and so that's why the challenge is to find incremental improvements and incremental increases in all of these areas and slowly advance that hydrogen economy. And that's what we're looking at doing in Alberta.
No, Minister, let me just pause you for a minute, because I want to find out what some of the regulatory changes or legal changes or barriers might be that you're going to have to be addressing. But you mentioned that we're not a leader yet in blue hydrogen. And I've already noticed that this has begun, that we're sort of talking about hydrogen in different categories, green and blue. I heard there's a turquoise, yes, and gray is the other area. And I wonder, Brent, if you can sort of sketch that out for us a little bit so that we understand why we have those categorizations. And I'll tell you my concern already, because I've been into a couple of international conferences this week that have been airing, and it does seem like green is seen to be preferable to all the other types. And I'm a little bit worried that if we don't start sort of changing the language around this to maybe talk about zero emissions hydrogen, that there's going to be a concerted effort to try to keep blue hydrogen out of the mix. So Brent, tell us a little bit about those categorizations so we can understand what people mean when they talk about that.
Sure. No, that's a really important issue and something we deal with on every day, basically, as we talk about hydrogen, because hydrogen conventionally has been produced using natural gas without carbon capture and storage historically. So that's considered, I guess, gray hydrogen in some circles. But now in Alberta, of course, we are producing hydrogen at facilities like the Shell Quest facility for the oil sands upgrading process, also at the Nutrien facility, also in the industrial heartland, and the Sturgeon refinery, where again the CO2 is being captured and put to good use. So that's been this terminology coming around blue hydrogen. So it's much cleaner. It could be 60 to 95. It can actually be 100% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions associated with those technologies as we start to push the envelope. Then green hydrogen is really using a different production technology for hydrogen from electrolysis processes using electricity. And now, of course, the question always becomes, well, where's your electricity coming from? It may not always be coming from the most green of sources. Even large hydro isn't necessarily considered green in some circles. So it gets very confusing when you start to talk about all the different options, nuclear power, different types of renewable electricity. So I think the focus really does need to be pushed towards carbon intensity and showing you can meet a very low carbon intensity standard. And again, we've done some work, some of the Alberta organizations we work with have done some work showing that we already are producing very low carbon intensity hydrogen. We can even do better in the future. And it certainly is much more cost effective as well compared to other let's say the green or the renewable electricity sources. We know costs will come down. That's the same for I think any technology, but we do need to be careful when we start talking about colors. It creates a lot of confusion. We had a webinar recently with the California market. I think the assumption was California only wants green, and we talked to their experts, and it was like, well, no, actually, you can use hydrogen from natural gas with CCS and perhaps even other technologies combined, and that meets their standards. So it gets very confusing when you focus on the colors, and I think there's agreement amongst many players that we need to begin moving away from that very quickly.
Yeah, Minister, let me put that to you as well. How should we be talking about this? Because I think we've seen in the past there have been active campaigns to target Alberta's oil sands, as a for instance. I sure wouldn't want to see the same kind of campaign targeting our natural gas and our new hydrogen economy. What kind of actions are you taking, or would you recommend taking, so that we can make sure that we're talking about this the right way?
Well, I think Brent absolutely nailed it, because there are people that are embracing green just because it's got the word green in it, and in fact there are other colors that actually are lower carbon than green in some instances, depending on how it was produced. So Brent is right, and our official position, Danielle, is we're agnostic to the color of the hydrogen. We just want it to be clean, low carbon, and affordable hydrogen, and that's what our position is. And right now, there's no doubt that blue hydrogen, of course, made from natural gas, and it's got a significant cost advantage over other types of hydrogen production. But ultimately, we're agnostic to color as long as it is clean hydrogen. It's low GHGs. That's the type of affordable energy that we're going to promote in Alberta.
All right, let me go through each of these different 5 areas to see if there are any barriers that need to be addressed, and Minister, that you're working on. So Brent, in the first area, heating, residential and commercial, it sounds to me like this pilot project is going to help probably work out some of the technical issues, but I am sort of keen to understand why they're only mixing 20% hydrogen into the stream. Is that because the pipes, as they're built, cannot handle a higher concentration of hydrogen? Is there something that we need to be looking at in future in engineering those pipelines in order for them to be pure hydrogen? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, yeah, the blending project that Minister Nally referred to in Fort Saskatchewan, that's blending 5% hydrogen with the natural gas. And one of the issues there is just to make sure, there's comfort within, the consumers that use that natural gas that we've now blended with hydrogen, whether it's for appliances or their heating requirements, just to make sure, they fully understand there's no risk around doing that. So 5% is considered definitely, a safe level of blending, but can you push the envelope a little bit further? And we're seeing in Europe, they go well beyond 20%. California is also looking at blending more hydrogen with their natural gas, but this is an effort that's being reviewed extensively, again, with the research community to understand what's the impact of doing that. Generally we think, the pipes can certainly take it, but as you start to get into higher proportions of hydrogen, there are materials issues we need to be aware of. So, that's again where, we work with the body developing new standards for natural gas use. So it's an international effort really looking at all of this. The Europeans have been a bit of a leader in blending hydrogen with natural gas for quite some time. So we want to, lean on their experience as much as possible, but also understand what are some of the local issues that we have here. Again, northern climates, or maybe some other challenges that we just need to make sure are being well addressed and be able to meet societal expectations.
Now, anything to add to that, Minister? Is there anything that you've already identified that is going to be a barrier that has to be moved out of the way so we see more of that?
Well, I would suggest that it's early days. We're very excited about hydrogen, Danielle, but really there's so much that that we're still learning, and that's one of the reasons why we're adopting a hub approach, where we're going to have. You probably saw that Edmonton is the first hydrogen hub in Canada, and that's going to have different components to it, and it's also going to be about doing more research and development. We want to have a center of excellence. We need to embrace academia in this, because there is still lots that we have to learn. I mean, Brent made the point that 5% is an absolutely safe level of blending, but where is that optimal point of blending, and we're not sure yet. And so there's lots of work that has to be done, and we need to embrace academia and bring them into it, so that we can answer those questions. So there's still lots of work to be done.
Okay, as a payer of the carbon tax on my home heating, if we start seeing a higher concentration of hydrogen going into that stream, it would seem that it should have some implication on the amount of tax that we pay. How's that going to be factored in?
Well, that's I'm glad that you asked that, and those are the things that we have to address. If we blend hydrogen into your natural gas, that would reduce the carbon tax, of course. And so there's lots of pieces that we still have to work out. But that is the good news, is with lower GHG energy, you will see a lower carbon tax bill. So that is certainly one of the advantages.
All right, let me talk to Brent now about the second area, the power generation and storage. Give me some sense of, do we need to be engineering a different type of power unit in order to use hydrogen in it, or what are some of the complexities we're dealing with there?
No, not really. When we talk about power generation and storage, I guess those are actually two separate issues, but let's focus on the generation for a moment. We've already making progress in Alberta, moving from coal towards natural gas. So now you're seeing some of the same, the turbines potentially can also make use of hydrogen. So you can further reduce your greenhouse gas emission reductions. It's not a one-to-one ratio, because energy isn't as dense an energy, hydrogen is not as dense an energy carrier as natural gas, but you can still make further emission reductions. So we've seen some of the players within the Alberta region, looking as they begin to retrofit their facilities from coal to natural gas. Can you install turbines that can also make use of a blend of hydrogen? And again, what's that right level of blend? Lots of research going on, lots of experience internationally around that, different manufacturers with different products that they can put on the market. So, again, maybe 25 to 30% blending, so further emission reductions. So we're seeing that approach being pursued in Alberta and in other jurisdictions. Of course, it will depend on the economics and it's the overall regulatory approach, and making sure, again, we can understand any materials impacts from using those hydrogen blends on the equipment itself.
Okay, and let's talk about the storage aspect of it, because Minister, I moderated a session earlier this week talking about all of the incredible uses for carbon dioxide, that it can be captured and turned into carbon black, and turned into carbon fiber, and turned into industrial minerals like magnesium carbonate, and turned into even ethylene, so it can make alcohol. There's a vodka that is made out of carbon dioxide. It can be put into concrete to make concrete stronger. I just wonder, are we exploring all of those opportunities? I'm just a little bit worried that we're focused so much on burying the carbon dioxide that maybe there's actually more opportunity in monetizing it and creating useful products out of it.
Well, we have, in the University of Calgary, they're doing some interesting research on hydrogen, and so that work is happening, yes. But like I said, this is early days, and there's a lot of work that has to happen. And that's why we're going to be looking at building out these centers of excellence that are going to be in a position to do this type of research. Because you're right, we almost don't know how much we know at this point about hydrogen and all the different applications. So there's lots of work to be done, and that's where the strategy comes in place, because we have to decide, since it's early days, how much do we lean into this? How much do we promote the idea of these centers of excellence and the work that academia has to do? And those are the things that we're going to see in the strategy. So I can't go into too much detail, Danielle. I can just tell you that we're going to answer that question fairly soon.
When is that strategy coming out? Just so I know when to get back to you on it.
Very, very soon.
Very soon.
Very early summer for sure.
Okay, fantastic. Just on the issue, though, of storage, tell me some of the factors that you're considering, because I gather that you're putting out a call for proponents to identify geologic formations where we can do storage. What is it that is going to be considered there?
Well, of course, it won't be us that's doing the storage. It'll be private enterprise, but they're already doing that work. They're looking at there's lots of opportunity. I mean, as you know, we are blessed with beautiful geology for storage. We've got this incredible caverns, and that is the opportunity that we have. And so we are looking for private enterprise to essentially leverage that storage capacity that we have in this province. And we've been having conversations. We did during our the early days of our hydrogen strategy consultations, we consulted with over 100 organizations. We spoke with First Nations, and that was one of the conversations that they brought to our attention, is that storage is a big component, and so you'll see that in the strategy as well.
All right. If you wouldn't mind just weighing in a bit on exports, and if we're only able to blend a certain portion of the hydrogen into existing natural gas lines, I imagine that you could do the same kind of approach if you want to export, is that you'd export a combination of natural gas and hydrogen. But are there some things that need to be worked out on that front as well? Hydrogen, I gather, is a little bit more complex to liquefy, a little bit more complex to store. What are the things that we would be considering if we did want to export, Minister?
Well, there's a few different ways that we can go. I mean, obviously, pipeline would be an excellent route to go for exporting hydrogen, but also ammonia is an excellent carrier of hydrogen, and also is methanol as well. And so you could utilize rail for that export opportunity. So these are all the things that have to come together. I would suggest that it's early days today for start building a pipeline to the coast, but that allows us to explore the ammonia and the methanol opportunities to move hydrogen. And like I said, we have had companies that have been looking at Alberta, looking at our opportunities for specifically ammonia.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Brent?
No, I think that's exactly true. When you start to look at how you transport, hydrogen, you need to look at ammonia as that energy carrier for it. So that introduces the whole, some of the challenges around moving that around. So again, I think the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub has begun to catalyze some of those conversations with different players within that overall value chain. So I think lots of conversations need to happen, and they're beginning to happen. So that's been very positive.
All right. When you talk about mobility, Minister, I'm telling you, I've got my eye on a Toyota Murray, which is one of the sort of the single passenger or the passenger vehicles that are out there that are already on hydrogen. I think that there's also one Hyundai makes a product. I think Honda does as well. But when I was looking one up, and I did find one in Alberta, they said, don't even think of buying one until you can get a ready supply of hydrogen so that you can fill up. So you've talked about the potential for creating these stations so that we can support truck traffic. But what about for passenger vehicles?
Well, that's where the hydrogen fuel cell comes in. And I can tell you, a couple of years ago, Elon Musk was sort of turning his nose at the hydrogen fuel cell and said that's a technology that has been passed up. But I tell you, I think that's coming to the forefront right now, and I think that we're going to hear more about that. And so you might see the hydrogen fuel cell for smaller vehicles, and then hydrogen fueling stations for the larger vehicles for things like trains that will be fuel powered by hydrogen. So significant opportunities. We just need to lean into it a little bit, and that's what that pilot that we're doing is all about. It's about an opportunity for us to get those first large industrial trucks moving back and forth between Edmonton and Calgary, and so we can then start moving forward with getting more large scale vehicles, trains, that type of thing.
All right, I'm going to be bringing in the mayor of Sturgeon County to talk a little bit more about industrial processes, because I know you've got to go and you've been very generous with your time. But before you leave us, Minister, if you were to look out, I don't know, to 2050, which seems to be the target for Canada and the world to get to net zero, where do you see Alberta in 2050? What if everything goes according to plan on the hydrogen strategy? What would Alberta look like?
I believe that we will be an absolute global leader in clean hydrogen production. It'll be clean, it'll be affordable, and there will be the jobs that we will have in the hydrogen field, the royalties that we will get. It is going to be significant. It could be as big, it could even be bigger than the oil sands. And I believe, again, because we're looking in the crystal ball, Danielle, when we look backwards and we talk about the oil sands and we say, thank goodness that Premier Lougheed had the foresight to lean into the oil sands when he did, and the development that we got and the wealth that was created from it. I believe in 2050, they're going to say, thank goodness that Premier Kenney had that foresight to lean into hydrogen a little bit and advance this industry in Alberta, because the potential is significant.
All right. I know that we're going to be talking about an Edmonton hub in just a minute. Is there going to be some need to have a northern hub and a southern hub? Is there any place in southern Alberta that would be looking at doing the same thing, or are there just some economies that you get from concentrating everything in one spot?
Well, I don't want to start foreshadowing, where you'll see other hubs, but I can tell you that Edmonton will not be the only hub, and you will be seeing other hubs in the future as well. Yeah.
All right, Minister, thank you so much for joining us today. I sure appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure speaking with you, Danielle.
You got it. That was the Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, Minister Dale Nally. So Brent, do talk about that, because that's what I was before I don't want everyone to get too jealous as we start talking about the hydrogen hub, because it sounds like you're quite far along in the planning stages on this in the Edmonton area. And I'm just wondering, to how many hubs could there be in Alberta? Is there some advantage in keeping it concentrated, or do you think that there's going to be opportunity for many more?
That's a good question, and I think you need to understand, what's the depth of hydrogen hub, and recognize there will be lots of hubs. They'll all be different, though. I mean, there's hubs in Eastern Canada as well. They have different type of focus depending on the industries. We think Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub is certainly, positioned to be that early leader here. We already are the largest producer of hydrogen in Canada, and we can build off of that. There's other opportunities certainly in Southern Alberta, different ways to look at hydrogen, some of the industries that can come together. So, some of the teams we work very closely with are spending some time to think about that. Hubs need to be connected. So if we're producing all this hydrogen in the Edmonton region, where is it going? Certainly for export, but we have vehicles that will be moving up and down the highway. We have different facilities in Calgary, obviously. So there are conversations about what each of these areas needs to be doing to develop its own hydrogen economy, including Northern Alberta as well, with the oil sands, and already a big user of hydrogen.
Okay, let me just bring in our next guest, and I'm quite sure I've already offended her by talking about it being the Edmonton hub, because it's really Edmonton Region Hub, and it's in Sturgeon County. I'm speaking now with Mayor Alana Hnyatu. You have to forgive me. Am I saying your last name correctly? Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Hnyatu.
So Mayor Hnyatu, let's talk about the opportunity here. Is the hydrogen hub actually going to be located in your county?
It actually is. It's not necessarily a location as a space and a table that the right people can come together and have the conversations, but obviously for investment and kind of ground zero to start the work, it makes sense to do it in the heartland. And that was an independent study done by the Transition Accelerator that noted, because the Alberta Industrial Heartland was already making 40% of the hydrogen in Alberta, be it gray, being used for industrial purposes, it made sense to start the hub there because the skill set was there, the capacity was there. It's the headwater for the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, as well as the Quest carbon capture for Shell is located there. So there's the skill set, the expertise, and the natural gas there to get the work started. But as I did hear Brent mentioning, there'll be different hubs, spread out across Canada, depending on what color they're going to be making, or what technology they're going to be utilizing. So we're the center of that hub for sure, but the expectation is that when we get the complexities worked out around figuring out price and players and transportation modes, et cetera, and even carriers, as you mentioned, ammonia and methanol, then we will connect to the other nodes, whether down to Calgary, Fort McMurray, and then ultimately spread across Canada and connect where that makes sense.
So you'd already mentioned that there's 40% of the hydrogen is already made in that area. Tell us what hydrogen is currently used for. I didn't get into the issue of industrial processes with the minister, but give us some idea of how it's being used so that we understand that it already is a proven technology.
Well, maybe I should have paid more attention in my chemistry in high school, and so I'm not going to pretend to have a level of expertise that I don't have. So I'll suffice to say it's used in refining carbon-based products. And so I'm just going to leave it at that, because for someone that is in the know, if I make a misstep, it'll drive them
Well,
crazy.
that's what Brent's here. Brent's going to give us
So
some
we'll
idea.
let Brent talk about the chemistry behind it. So I'm just going to stick to its industrial uses, and that's what it's used for. And then I'll just pitch that to Brent to fill in the details.
Yeah. So Brent, why don't you pick it up from there? Because I think that there is this sense that it's a fuel of the future, but it's also been a fuel of the present. And we've been developing this for some time, but it's one of those hidden fuels that, because we don't use it on a day-to-day basis in our day-to-day lives, if we're consumers, I don't think we have a very good idea of the ways in which it's used. So can you fill in some of those blanks?
Sure, I'll do my best. Certainly, as Mayor Natu mentioned, really that upgrading process, upgrading and refining from those heavier, the bitumen that we produce up in Fort McMurray, to get it to a point where it can be processed and put into the pipes. So, we see a significant amount used for upgrading, like Shell Quest, oil sands refining as well, but also for ammonia production. For the fertilizer sector, for example, and other, I guess, unique chemicals. So we have chemical companies located in the Alberta industrial heartland, and my understanding is some of them, there will be some hydrogen use for different commodities that are being produced from the petrochemical sector.
So Mayor, tell us a little bit about how you think that this designation is going to attract additional business development into your region. I think we've been paying some attention to the Regional Partnership for Business Attraction. I'm assuming this is going to play a pretty key role, but tell me how you think you can build on what you've already got there.
Well, again, the Heartland Association is an association, a collaborative between 5 municipalities. It spans over 22 years. So as you can tell, because of the complexity of the system transformation that we're undertaking, it takes strong relationships between post-secondaries, industry, all levels of government, and trades, and as well First Nations. And we have all of that here. So as I said, it's creating a space for everyone to come together and to have those conversations, and that's what we're prepared to do right now, as well, being having the industry there creating this and having the technology there, but also being on the doorstep of 1 million people in the region, sitting on the edge of the city of Edmonton, the city of St. Albert, gives us opportunity to be able to collaborate in ways that we can drive the demand beyond just what's required for the industrial use, because driving demand is what we need to be able to create the sweet spot in the price capacity to incent people to continue to make it so that it's affordable to add into our gas grid, and ultimately to be able to export it as well. And so we're currently looking at how to transition the fleets, the municipal fleets in the area around, buses, garbage trucks, that type of thing. So we're endeavoring to start now on what would be a market sounding process with industry to seek their input on how best to accelerate the industry investment. And because, of course, we all know, coming out of Alberta in the last few years, people need some certainty and some clarity, and they need to see on the horizon that there is going to be certainty for the investment cycle. And these investment cycles are millions and billions of dollars. So we need to get together and have clarity about, sticking to our knitting over the next 5 or 10 years to start to get this work underway, and continue to insist on the provincial and the federal governments showing up where needed, as needed, to support private investment where appropriate, but also understand that often it does take investment from governments as well to actually prove that we are in it for the long haul. And there's several examples in the history of Alberta where that's been done before. I know the oil sands was mentioned too. So, we're going to sit down with investors, producers, manufacturers, operators, and other interested companies around the hydrogen economy, and sort out heavy duty transportation demand, the retail fueling infrastructure, transmission around export and domestic, and as you've touched on already, the utility heat, power demands, industrial heat, and then obviously what that's going to cost and who's going to pay for the transformation. I mean, it's got to be able to be sustainable on its own eventually. And I think that's where some of the pushback comes in the green conversation. People don't want to see government subsidizing traditional oil and gas. What they need to understand, this is not traditional oil and gas. This is, these are traditional, chemistry and science that people are well versed in, but this is using them in different ways. And this is using our traditional knowledge that Canada is world renowned for, especially around carbon capture, and leveraging what could be trapped value if we don't get this right. And then, leveraging that into a future, a low carbon energy future where, again, Canadian expertise is leading the way and helping to educate the world on how hydrogen is, the smallest molecule and the greatest common denominator. So that's what we're up to here in a nutshell.
Yeah, Brent, jump off what Mayor Nachu was saying there about who is it almost a chicken and egg problem, isn't it? Is that we now know what kind of capacity we have for filling stations because we look out and we see them just outside our door and down the street. We're beginning to see electric charging stations roll out, albeit at a slower rate. The idea of being able to transition all of those filling stations over to hydrogen sounds like an immense difficulty and an immense project. And so whose job is that? Is that the job of the companies that own the current stations? Is this going to be brand new companies that create sort of competing stations? Or how do you think that infrastructure is going to get built? Is it going to require municipalities and the provincial and federal government to step in?
Well, I think ultimately it's the private sector that's going to move ahead as they moved ahead, traditionally with these new markets as well. Then the question is, what's the role for government organizations to support some of that enabling infrastructure that's going to be required? And even at a higher level, just how do we bring some of the groups together? And that's really what the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub can do is, bring some of the players together. We're seeing that in the trucking sector with the Alberta Motor Transport Association and all those fleets, moving individually on their own, that's a bit of a risky proposition for some of them. But if you can move together as a group, reduce some of those costs, look at maybe some joint purchases, that really does accelerate that development of the infrastructure. And then what's that overall plan? So Mayor Nat, you mentioned a market sounding process. So how can we ensure the plan we put in place won't be the perfect plan? It won't be it probably won't be the ultimate plan that is being realized, but it does provide a bit of a vision as to what that hydrogen economy will look like within the region, and put some confidence, provides confidence to the players within various sectors about how refueling infrastructure will proceed. So, I like to think of it as, in the technology sector, we often talk about little technology sandboxes. Well, the Hydrogen Hub is one heck of a sandbox. It's look at the size of it. It's 100,000 square kilometers of sandbox, everything from the industrial heartland all the way through to the Edmonton International Airport. That's very keen on testing some new technologies and being its own aviation sandbox, working very closely now with Air Canada, for example, just announced earlier this week. So again, incredible things going on within the region, and sandbox maybe sounds like it's a bit of a experiment going on. And it's well beyond that. We're now talking about making some early investments and having that plan in place. So quite exciting.
So Minister Nachu, do you know where the filling stations are going to be? I guess I've been watching as things have unfolded in California. Last I checked, I think they were up to 45 filling stations, and we've got one in Vancouver, one in Burnaby, and one in Kelowna. Are we far enough down the path to know where the future filling stations might be for the long haul trucking, at least?
Certainly, and some of the reports coming out of the Transition Accelerator and the Heartland Task Force paper did look specifically at those routes and took those into consideration. So the information is there, and when government and industry show that they're serious about this, then the investment will come. And I think just the announcement between ATCO and that's a strong trigger, a proof that industry is seeing the importance of the hydrogen economy, and so that's why they have partnered with Suncor. And so I think it's incumbent on us to have those conversations about where the cost should land. But I do think when you look at the number of trucks on the road, the demand is there. It's just making sure we do the math to make sure that nobody's left stranded in the middle of nowhere. But when you look at as the pilot project on Highway 2, I mean, that's perfect. And again, up to Fort Mac. So there's places where those can come in effect. And I mean, there's fueling stations all over the world. I think we're still kind of fooling ourselves if we think that this is future or unproven technology. It's proven and it's happening in other places around the world. It's just getting the cost set right so that we can expand it here. And so, but it comes with transitioning those fleets, which is why the municipalities being at the table is so important. We need to reach that critical mass in a very coordinated way and be working closely with industries so that as we trigger that demand, the supply is there. And as the EVs were mentioned, I mean, those will also be a part of what the fix is. But in a country this large with the different regional contexts in place, this is not going to be a one size fits all. So as there should be rollouts for charging stations for EVs, there will need to be rollouts for fueling stations for hydrogen. But luckily for us, we've got Air Products and Air Liquide who have those types of partnerships around the world and do know how to do that safely. They just need the indication that it's a safe investment or a safer investment, which will require us coordinating on this stuff together.
I don't know if you heard the conversation that Brent and the minister and I were having earlier about how there already seems to be a bit of a campaign to categorize hydrogen into different color categories. And I'm really trying to resist that language because I feel like they're trying to create a hierarchy of what is the better type of hydrogen versus a lesser type of hydrogen. And I'm wondering how you're approaching that issue. Is there's some language that we should be using? Because it seems to me that if we're capturing the CO2 and either using it for useful purposes or we're burying it, it's zero emissions hydrogen. It's just as good as any other type of hydrogen. How are you approaching that issue if people are raising it with you?
Well, perfection is the enemy of good. And there's question as to whether green is perfect as well. I mean, if you're using hydro as your source to create green hydrogen, there's footprint. There's an environmental footprint to that as well. So I just hope when people are having those conversations that they are doing the well-to-wheel analysis of what the entire footprint is and what the entire investment is. And I think, to start getting hung up on whether it's going to be turquoise, pink, green, or blue is, I think that's a first world argument that we really ought not to get ourselves tied up in. And as I did hear a little bit of that conversation, and it became clear in the webinar with California, it's carbon intensity. So I think we just need to understand that this is, blue hydrogen because of the cost, because it's a third of the cost of diesel, and because we have the expertise for all of those low cost feedstock, the carbon capture that we have. This is the cornerstone that we need to launch to be able to allow regions based on the investments that are already there, the infrastructure that's already there, the human capital that is already there, for us to have a right to be able to contribute to the hydrogen economy that suits our region and our skill sets. And whether it's going to be green on the East Coast or blue out west, I think we have to understand that we all can share into the same type of hydrogen economy, no matter how we make it. And we need the federal government to understand that. And I know Minister O'Regan has said he's not going to pick between his children. They're going to refrain from picking that color. Obviously, I think the European Union has taken a bit of a different tack, and that's their right to do that. But I think when it comes right down to it, when we can deliver, and we can deliver at a cost competitive price, I don't think anyone's going to be saying no to affordable, low cost hydrogen.
Let me ask Brent about that, because I think that Edmonton Global recently hosted the Natural Resources Minister Shaman O'Regan and the Western MP Jim Carr in talking about the approach to hydrogen. I like the way the mayor just put that. He's not going to choose between his children. Can you sort of pass on some of the learning from that session?
Well, I wasn't directly involved in that session, but I mean, I think exactly.
Oh, well, hold on then, Brett. Let me go back to the mayor. So yeah, pass on a little bit of what you heard in that session, Mayor.
You know, it's very consistent with what I've said. They and Minister O'Regan has said as well. You know, they have an oil and gas industry on the East Coast that requires oil and gas to still get the green light and still get the support across Canada. The jobs depend on it. So I think that's been a steadfast response of his, and I hope that the Prime Minister holds to that, and I really hope that people can just get involved in being educated and not just picking a label, picking a side, and staying there. I think the discussion around hydrogen and the industries that we see stepping forward to make investments and to ask for partnerships with government are a signal. We're getting the message, and perhaps it's a bit overdue, but let's just get down to work creating low cost energy for Canada and for the world, and ultimately in that process, perhaps get some credit for what we can give in lowering the emissions around the world, and then take that credit back here, because right now, you know, we're charged with the emissions that we're shipping off to other countries, and we're not responsible necessarily for what they do in their combustion process, but we're still credited with the emissions. And so if we can start to export lower cost energy and export our knowledge in carbon capture to help China and Korea and other countries figure out whether carbon capture is something that fits for them, we should get that credit. I think we've just been quietly doing our job, leading the way, and taking the boots getting laid to us. And it's time that we actually need to step forward with some clear science and some proof that we are committed to lowering emissions. And that industry is committed in playing their role as well.
I like that thought. So Brent, let me go back to you, because it does make me a bit nervous that it does really appear that Europe is going in a different direction, and I'm just a bit concerned about the tone of some of the discussions. I'm wondering if there's some trends that you're seeing. Is North America as a whole going to go in one cohesive direction? Is there anything proactively that you think when it comes to messaging about this, how we should be talking about it with other jurisdictions? I know Europe does have a big influence, not only on us, but also on the sort of the United Nations approach. And so I just want to make sure that we know how to be proactive on this. What's your thought on that, Brent?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd go back to Minister Nally's comments earlier. I mean, the hydrogen opportunity is a $2.5 trillion opportunity. This is a very significant play, and it's going to require, you know, everybody, jurisdictions that can retool to produce hydrogen, to be doing that to meet both the local demand and that export needs as well. So whether it's in Asia or the United States or elsewhere. So, and again, we need to be thinking who can move quickly at scale. So that's where Alberta, the Alberta Industrial Heartland area, the Edmonton region fits in. We can do this at scale. We're already doing it at scale. So when you hear about new technologies, electrolysis technologies, yeah, those are interesting. They will have a role to play, but they are not able to produce at scale at anywhere close to the level that we can right now. So we'll be watching those, and then there'll be, you know, great opportunities down the road for some of those jurisdictions that can use their low-cost renewable electricity to produce hydrogen. But we don't need to wait for that. We can be moving now. We can get again some of those first-mover advantages and build up our value chains around that. And you mentioned Europe. You know, we have lots of conversations with partners in Europe. We look at the UK, for example. They're pursuing hydrogen hubs as well, very somewhat similar to what we're doing. And you look at places like Aberdeen, Scotland. You know, that's also an oil and gas town. And they are making use of their natural, the fossil fuel resources to produce hydrogen, maybe for their local needs. We talk often about Germany. Certainly when we talk to Germany, there's not a lot of interest in producing hydrogen from fossil fuels within that country, but they actually do import natural gas, and they will be importing hydrogen as well. Perhaps from places like Russia that are producing it in a very similar way that we are, but not necessarily with the strong ESG framework that we have here. So I think you have to be quite careful when you talk about what Europe will be doing, because there's sort of the politics of it and the reality of it, and we're discovering the reality can be a little bit different at times.
It's true. Mayor Natch, do we have some allies in the environmental community that are supporting what you're doing in the industrial heartland? It's always good to have those who are in alignment with the overall goal of trying to reduce overall emissions, but sometimes those allies have been pretty hard to find in the green movement. Have you had some expressions of support?
Well, I think just the fact that we have, two First Nations chiefs and mayor of the city of Edmonton, who has spent years working to kind of revamp the profile or the brand of the oil city, because we all, we all understand the importance of the industry, but we also understand the importance of the airshed that we're trying to protect as well. So, I mean, just locally, those are people who don't necessarily just throw their name behind initiatives if they don't actually see some promise in. But as far as any kind of organized environmental groups, I haven't. I've been interviewed by the Narwhal, and I mean, it was a fairly fair article, and so I think there hasn't necessarily been anyone that's come out against it, certainly not towards me, and that might change in the coming months and years. But I think it's just really important on us, and you've spoken a little bit about how oil and gas has been painted, and it happened around agriculture to a degree as well. Yeah. When we're just busy doing our work and we're not really busy telling our own story, we leave that narrative open for someone else to tell our story for us. And Albertans and Canadians need to get better at owning our story, owning our narrative. And this is an opportunity for us to learn from maybe some of our past mistakes of being maybe a little bit too meek about what we were doing right. And so that's why I'm out here talking about it. I think we should not shy away from those conversations. If there's someone that has grave concerns, we need to sit down and have that conversation and learn from each other, and then find a better way forward. Because this one side against the other, we're all going to end up blind in the end. And I expect more of Alberta, and I expect more of Canada.
Let's then talk about some of if people want to plug in to the process, if there are people who are excited about what's going on, think they have an idea, want to contribute to that additional value chain and growing it out, what is the way to plug into the process?
I would say monitor the ERH2.ca website, the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub website. That's where we will share information. And that's something that we want to be really diligent about, finding the balance of getting this right as quickly as possible, and then sharing as much information out as quickly as possible, so that those other hubs can take off faster based on the learnings that we've had. So certainly reaching out to me or going to the website is a good way to tie in, or reaching out to Brent at Edmonton Global for sure. They've got a great team there as well. And that's how we'll, consider where and how to have some dialogue with those folks who are interested, because we're all stakeholders in this for sure.
Let me ask you then the same question I asked the minister, is if you're looking out to 2050, because we've got a couple of different signposts that we're trying to meet along the way, and different objectives that the federal government and the international community have set. Give us what you hope will be the conversation or the story we're telling in 2050.
Oh, I really do hope that the story we're telling is the success about how when we're handed a great deal of adversity, a global pandemic, and the bottoming out of the oil and gas industry, that we were able to prioritize and build appropriate alliances and allegiances to work our way out and be better on the other end. And I know the Build Back Better is very overused, but I think in its very simplest form, it is true. We have been in this province laid bare in a number of ways, and we need to learn where we made mistakes. We need to look at on the horizon and maybe stop debating whether or not greenhouse gas emissions are real or whether climate change is real, and look at the fact that the investment climate is real and the investment climate has changed. And if we want to continue to receive global investment in our energy sector here, and even in our ag sector, a number of industries, if there's those ESG parameters and boxes that investors are checking around the world, we need to meet those if we want to be a part of the future. And so I hope in 2050 we look back and we can understand that we got that right, and that we took the place that we really deserve to be in. That's my hope.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us to share the story. I know you've got to go, but I sure appreciate your time today.
Thank you. And it is Mayor. Thank you very much for your time and for your interest in this, Danielle. I know I spoke to you briefly about it in your previous iteration of radio, and stay tuned because there's great opportunity here.
You got it. That's the Mayor of Sturgeon County, Alana Nachu. So let's continue on with this conversation just for a few more minutes, Brent, because I get the sense that there are some people who think that it's a bit premature to be having this conversation, and that there's still some things that have to be worked out with hydrogen. And I wonder if we can talk through that a little bit so that people understand what problems there still are that need to be worked out, and why we haven't been to a point where we've really seen this take off to this point. I mean, I think everybody points to the Hindenburg, for instance, and say, oh my gosh, this is going to explode. It's highly flammable. But you know what? So was natural gas, right? And so we've managed to engineer our way around some of those problems. Do we still have some engineering problems to sort out with hydrogen?
Well, I mean, I think with every energy process, there'll be some engineering challenges. So I mentioned earlier, again, some of the materials challenges around hydrogen causing steel embrittlement. So again, that's understanding, what's your infrastructure you're looking to make use of that hydrogen. It doesn't mean you have to use that old infrastructure. You may be moving towards some new infrastructure, but what's that transition pathway going to look like? And that's why we talk about blending certain levels to allow us to get some experience. So, there's public confidence, there's beginning to deal with that chicken and egg issue around infrastructure and building demand that links to the supply. But then also at the same time, looking at what's that new infrastructure you need to be putting into place that will be appropriate for the hydrogen economy. And, it's great here in Alberta. We have some leading edge companies that are involved in the energy sector already, the oil and gas sector, the pipeline sector, that can bring that knowledge and that detail, the testing approaches to the fore, and again, really drive this forward. So I think there's incredible roles for many of these companies already within the Edmonton area, the Alberta region, that have experience in dealing with hydrogen itself or very similar issues, and can start to deal with those engineering challenges. Because I don't think they're not showstoppers by any means. You mentioned the Hindenburg. I mean, I think that deals with more public perception issues. The story around the Hindenburg is, it wasn't the hydrogen that caused that fire you see in the old picture. It was the sheathing or the covering, of that Zeppelin that went up. So, again, you need to deal with those challenges. I was involved in the carbon storage issue several years back, and again, all these, wouldn't quite say they're myths, but perceptions around what's happening to all this CO2 that's going down into geological formations, and some of these stories they've heard about similar instances in places like Africa, which had nothing to do at all with the type of storage that we're talking about for CO2. So I think we've managed to overcome that. Very interesting. I was going to talk about, the Shell Quest project or other CCS projects that we have going on in Alberta that, 10 years ago, they were seen to be somewhat experimental, even though at the time we did have massive amounts of experience already in injection of fluids, things like acid gas injection and so on. And now when you talk to some international partners, it's like, oh, Shell, the Shell Quest project, that's an incredible project. That's injecting over 1 million tons of CO2 per year. And now we have the Alberta Carbon Trunkline project, moving CO2 from the industrial heartland down to central Alberta, where it's being used for enhanced oil recovery. So again, I think we'll be able to say in maybe in 10 years time, maybe not 50 years time, that, we were groundbreakers in building up some of this energy infrastructure that now other parts of the world are doing as well. I just read yesterday, I believe, about in the United States building some carbon trunk lines that tied together some parts of the plains in the US. And I'm like, well, we've done this. We know how to do this. This is all kind of modeling after the Alberta examples. So I think we probably need to do a bit more in publicizing the work we're doing, showing how that ties to our ESG goals as well. And again, being quite proud of how we can bring together some of the key players that have that oil and gas background, that energy background, and pivoting into this hydrogen economy, and remaining leaders in this space. So I'm actually quite bullish. I don't think there are technical issues that we can't solve here within Alberta, and we can bring that experience to the table internationally, as well as these other hubs start to deal with very similar issues. We're seeing in the UK, for example, they're very interested in our CCS experience in Alberta. So we're looking for ways to connect that expertise to their hubs as they develop similar hydrogen hubs.
So tell us how that is. How is that changing the conversation about attracting investment dollars? Because we've been hearing about environmental, social governance, the ESG acronym that you made reference to. We've been hearing about that for some time, and I think the way it's been framed for a lot of people is that they fear that excludes us from being able to attract investment dollars here. And we have seen a divestment movement, in fact, that we have seen different companies lobby to stop investing in our traditional hydrocarbon sector. How can this conversation change that outcome? Are you already beginning to see that there is the potential to attract more investment dollars for these kinds of projects?
Sure. I mean, I think you're seeing that. Some of the announcements that were referred to earlier, Suncor, ATCO talking about major projects. So these are, energy companies, traditional oil and gas or utility companies that have, their experience has been in fossil fuel extraction and development, and beginning to see hydrogen as a very important part of their future state. So, I think there is investment definitely in this area where we understand there's other projects that also look at the industrial heartland as a very attractive location for producing, whether it's hydrogen or ammonia, as was referenced earlier. So, there is investment, and now we need to look at the overall supply chain. So again, some companies might have seen themselves, well, I'm an oil and gas company. It's like, well, no, you're an energy company, and you can bring some really important skills to the table and talent that you may have that could just pivot a little bit into that hydrogen space. So I think there will be incredible opportunities to be part of that, $2.5 trillion opportunity. In Canada, we talk about a $100 billion opportunity. And there's no reason why Alberta shouldn't be, I guess, the largest player within that economy, given our starting point.
So there was a Reuters conference today on the issue of hydrogen as well. And one of the projects profiled was the last coal plant in California, and it's going to be phased out. And instead, they're going to bring in, they're calling it green hydrogen, with the idea that you can produce a whole variety of, a whole bunch of hydrogen when you get surges, whether it's for wind or whether it's for solar. And if you can convert that into hydrogen, that offers an opportunity to store that power so that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you have the ability to create some stability in your grid by selling it back into. Is there some conversation going on about that? Because I mean, I can see there's pockets around the province, particularly in southern Alberta with wind, and certain other areas in the province with solar, where if you can combine that type of technology, you might end up creating a win for that sector and the stability of the electricity grid as well.
Yeah, that's right. And Minister Nally, had that power and storage piece. We didn't really talk fully on the storage side, but that's around the world, especially where hydrogen is seen to have a lot of value as a storage for renewable electricity. You're seeing that in Germany. That's why there's such a strong interest in some regards in hydrogen, because they are also producing vast amounts of intermittent renewable power, and you can convert that power into hydrogen gas and then make use of that later when you need it for power. So when we look at Alberta, certainly in southern Alberta, incredible, solar, wind potential, lots of investment going on in that space as well. And, does hydrogen then play a role as a bit of a storage mechanism? So I know our colleagues at the Transition Accelerator that are looking at hubs, across Western Canada, are having some initial conversations with some of the potential partners down in southern Alberta that, you've got incredible amounts of natural gas in the Medicine Hat area. You've got incredible solar potential. You've got wind. You've got some industries that are making use of this as well. So again, we talked about hubs, and that's a different type of hub, but different sectors coming together, different energy resources coming together. So that's why it's such an exciting time, because they can see themselves in this hydrogen field in different ways.
Well, that's the thing that's always troubled me about wind and solar in the grid is that especially when we looked at what happened in Texas, that when the natural gas failed, wind and solar weren't there to be able to make up the difference. But this then changes the conversation because I think in the past our conversation has been around, can we create some kind of battery option, which is really expensive. So this sort of acts like a battery, I guess, if you can store the energy in hydrogen form.
Yeah, often they talk about batteries, and I'm not an expert in this area, but and maybe shorter term storage through battery technologies. But when you talk about hydrogen for storage, it's much more at a larger system-wide, long-term scale. Again, you can produce significant amounts of hydrogen. You could even store it in salt caverns. Oh, by the way, Alberta's actually got pretty good geology for salt caverns that could be used for hydrogen storage, and we're seeing some projects in the United States looking at some cavern storage in Utah. I'm excited by that because I think our fossil fuel resources, our geology is not that dissimilar. So, maybe there's some very innovative approaches that could be looked at here as we move forward with hydrogen.
I also am a bit more curious about how export factors into this. So, if we develop a surplus of hydrogen in the Edmonton area hub, what is the way to get it to market? What's the most efficient way? Would it be rail to the coast and then overseas? Would we be looking at America as our export market? How do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, the industry will be leading those conversations. So I don't necessarily have the answer. I think there's a variety of different ways. We had our webinars recently looking at the California market. We already have some pipeline infrastructure. So perhaps that's one of those examples of blending hydrogen and natural gas to get that energy source down to the United States into the California market. That will be one of those early movers. You talk about Asia. Japan's made it quite clear they're looking for ammonia. They want to move off of coal and have some co-firing of coal with ammonia. So again, that's why you're seeing some very strong interest as we could be a very low-cost provider of ammonia. I don't want to say blue or green ammonia or any color, but low carbon ammonia for the Japanese market as they look at their future electricity systems. Similar conversations going on in Korea. And just lastly, we had a conversation even, looking at where China's planning to go on hydrogen, and might be a little bit of a different story in China, but again, massive market potentially, and something we should be thinking about.
Do we have a conversation to add in about nuclear as well? I moderated a session earlier in the week about the potential for small modular nuclear technology. And I think that that's one way in which we can also see greenhouse gas emissions go down, especially at some of the mining sites. But I wonder if there's a conversation happening about the use of nuclear into the electricity system and whether or not using that to create hydrogen is also on the radar screen. Is anyone talking about that?
There definitely are. I mean, I think from some of the organizations that are beginning to look at some future partnerships around nuclear, not one that we're directly involved in by any means, but as you look at that technology and you certainly look at the low greenhouse gas emissions or virtual zero greenhouse gas emissions, and from a systems perspective, what role can SMRs, not to be confused with SMRs for hydrogen production, but small nuclear reactors, or small modular reactors for nuclear power, could have a role as well in hydrogen production. So some of the work that the Transition Accelerator, some of the work that other institutes have been doing, have been looking at the economics associated with hydrogen from that source. But I guess the feeling is that we're already a low-cost producer today using the technologies that are fairly commercial. Not to say we don't want to be looking at some future alternatives that may be appropriate for the Alberta economy, but let's kind of start from the strengths that we have already, again, using the natural gas resource and the carbon capture and storage resource, and potentially other technologies that can be integrated into these systems.
I still can't help but feel like the conversation has changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of years. I mean, the sense that I got from talking to some environmental groups is that they thought the answer was only wind and solar, everything electrified on the grid, and no other alternatives. But when you broaden the discussion out to include hydrogen, and you broaden it out to use to talk about small modular nuclear reactors, it seems to me that every part of the industry is now being embraced in trying to get to a solution. Am I just being overly optimistic, or is that what's actually happening?
I think it is happening. I think there's a recognition with the time frame to move to net zero by 2050. I mean, frankly, that's an acceleration from when I first was looking at the greenhouse gas issue a couple decades ago. I mean, we were maybe thinking, by 2100. Well, we're talking 2050 now. So you can't be so particular. Again, perfection is the enemy of the good. We need all types of energy products getting into the market. So hydrogen has an important role to play, regardless of how it's being produced. If you can meet a low carbon intensity standard, nuclear has a role to play. So I think there's a recognition of that. But that being said, as you get into local issues, I mean, I think you'll always, then still run into some challenges where it's not the ideal solution for one region or one locale. So I don't think those entirely go away, but I think there is more broad-based acceptance, and certainly from the companies that are pursuing these projects, they are embracing, the net zero goals and targets. So I think we're seeing much more convergence now than probably 15 or 20 years ago.
Well, then I should probably see if you can, with this conversation under our belt, I wonder if you can put some context around the International Energy Agency report that came out this week, because I've had a number of people get back to me thinking that it's incredibly unrealistic. And when you talk it through the way we have and are looking at all the options, and you're looking at rolling out technology that's already been proven, I'm wondering, I mean, is it achievable, or is it too optimistic?
It's definitely a challenge, and those are scenarios that they're saying, if you are going to meet a net zero, here's what it would take, and here's the impacts you would see along the economy. So I think it's an interesting perspective to show. Can innovation, can creativity come up with some new approaches? And I'm a big believer that you bring players together, and that's really what the hub is about as well. You can come up with more creative solutions and things that maybe you hadn't thought about. Maybe some of these analysts at the IEA just never really thought about some aspect of our energy system. So I'm an optimist, but I think the challenge is moving quickly on projects that can move, right away. So, I'm encouraged to see, the announcements from the provincial government, from the federal government to support some early stage. And these aren't early small projects, these are large projects, but to get them going right away, because, we're not in a position to wait another 10 years because it will just become more costly and more challenging to meet these targets. So I think there seems to be an onus and a convergence from governments across the world that, we should be moving very quickly. This is a bit of part of that, retooling the economy. Maybe it's a post-COVID type of investment as well to pursue some of these projects and technologies that will allow us to get to net zero ultimately.
Let's talk about Alberta's net zero target, because part of the issue that we have is that we are a large producer of emissions. If I've got my numbers right, I think Canada as a whole is about 720 megatons of emissions, and Alberta in particular is 270. So give us a sense of how far you think this strategy would take us towards addressing that.
This strategy...
This hydrogen strategy and the hub and rolling it out. Is this just sort of a drop in the bucket? Is it a 10% solution? Does it get us all the way there? Put it into some context for us.
Well, I mentioned earlier the Canadian hydrogen strategy talks about hydrogen contributing about 30% potentially of our emission reductions, or the energy that we will be needing in a net zero economy could be coming from hydrogen. So it does have a significant role to play. And again, some of those more difficult to electrify sectors, like some key industries in Alberta, but also industries in Ontario and Quebec and elsewhere, that long haul transportation. So, I think that's an important consideration for hydrogen. I think as we talk about net zero, what are some of those solutions that we can be providing other parts of the world as well? So whether it's, that transport, that export of clean hydrogen elsewhere, that contributes to what we're trying to achieve and bring solutions to the globe. In many cases, it's very challenging to make some of those reductions directly at home, but we can at a more accelerated rate get them out into other parts of the world, including, natural gas and LNG, for example.
I live in hope that we will find something that will unite our country, that we can all get together on. And it's encouraging to me that there's an opportunity, obviously, for LNG, natural gas in British Columbia. So there must be a hydrogen opportunity there as well, especially with their hydropower. I gather Quebec is also a large producer of hydrogen. Give us some sense of what role you think Edmonton Global and also the hub in particular will play in kind of reaching out to other provincial jurisdictions to see if we can find some common cause.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see the hub as being a catalyst for those conversations. We have heard from different markets like Japan. We're very interested in the Canadian market for, let's say, clean ammonia, but we're not quite getting the signals yet that, your governments are really working together on this. So we have heard some very encouraging signals now from the federal natural resources minister, Minister Nally and others. And I guess one question is, where is British Columbia in this, and how are we working together to address those barriers around the exports of these types of products? So I think, Western Canada has a huge role to play, and it does require a very integrated approach, including the Indigenous communities, including engaging the public along some of those key corridors that will be quite instrumental in hydrogen transportation, whether it's by pipeline or by rail. You mentioned Quebec again, earlier in their development of the hydrogen economy. They're quite bullish, obviously, on some of the technologies, the electrolyzer technologies that they're beginning to trial. Again, not quite at the same scale that we're talking about in Alberta, but to provide hydrogen to maybe the east coast of the United States could be a very important player. So again, I think we need to look at it as a very complex energy system. And again, that's really some of the work that our friends at the Transition Accelerator and the Hydrogen Hub are really looking at that systems perspective, because it's not just a bunch of individual projects. It's a systematic approach to looking at this opportunity, both in Alberta, but also nationally.
You're giving me some hope that we're not late to the game. I always felt like we might have missed our opportunity on LNG because other jurisdictions, particularly Australia, were able to get to market faster than we were. Where do you rank us? Where are we relative to other jurisdictions that are in this race?
Yeah, a really important question when we talk about those export markets. I wouldn't say we're first. We're seeing some quick action by the Australians. We're seeing some action from the Middle East as well. Again, a place where they produce a lot of oil and gas, but they also have a very good, solar resource. So they see themselves providing some of that, whether it's clean ammonia or clean hydrogen to the Japanese market or the Korean markets. So we have a little bit of work to do to, I think, catch up to where they're at. But again, we are a current producer. We're a very low cost producer. We're, with the analysis that we've looked at with the Transition Accelerator and others show we're probably the second lowest cost producer of hydrogen today globally, and that's clean hydrogen as well. So it's a good starting point, but we now need to think about those logistical challenges in moving it out to those markets. So again, the hub is a bit of a catalyst for some conversations with key partners along that entire resource corridor, to move it through. I guess we're generally thinking west from Alberta to British Columbia, but that's many conversations will need to be occurring, with many different participants over the coming months.
Do you think that we should begin a conversation about a hydrogen pipeline across the entire country? I know the pipeline discussion has been so fraught and it's been so difficult to try to get provinces on board. We're facing the challenges, of course, with Keystone XL being canceled and with Line 5 under threat. I wonder if this is the kind of conversation that we can have about a pipeline project for Canadian energy security that connects all of our provinces together, that has some potential of being successful. Am I onto something here, or is this a non-starter?
Well, I think it depends on how we see these hubs emerging. So, one thought with hydrogen is ultimately you'll see a little more localized production for different markets. So, if you're in Manitoba, you may be able to produce hydrogen to meet your local demand, and you won't necessarily need those imports from elsewhere. So you might want to look at where the best corridors are. So maybe it's more of a regional basis. Maybe it's Alberta, British Columbia, and the Northwest U.S. states connecting into California, and something similar on the eastern side. So I think it really does depend a little bit about how those hubs do ultimately get themselves up and running, and what are the volumes that are being produced, and what are the demands that we're seeing from different regions. When we look at infrastructure, and one of the questions we often get though is, well, can we repurpose some existing infrastructure, or even routes for infrastructure for hydrogen? And that's where I'm quite optimistic that, again, with our technological expertise, we can find ways to, make use of the infrastructure and the routings that we already have, and see how those play in a hydrogen economy of the future.
Do you think that we have any regulatory issues that we're going to have to resolve? I guess I'm just accustomed to watching projects fail just by red tape and kind of the inertia that goes along with it's easier to say no than to say yes. The sense I'm getting is that there's a lot of will on the part of all levels of government to move forward. But do you think there's going to be any barriers from a regulatory point of view we need to be aware of?
Well, there will no doubt be barriers, but I think there is a collective will. We've heard about maybe the Team Canada approach to work on corridors and address any of these red tape issues, these challenges. Again, you got to work through each individual project eventually, and that's when the delays do pop up. But again, I'm not a regulator. I think there is a desire, though, to look at this as a very strategic opportunity for Canada, for Alberta, and one that we should be putting, some collective will towards. But ensuring we are, I think, respecting, the needs of the public and of, local groups as well at the same time.
All right, Brent, what it comes down to is I'm wondering if I'm ever going to be able to buy a hydrogen car, or if we're not, if we're ever going to, if we're going to get to the point in a reasonable time frame where owning a hydrogen vehicle is actually going to be likely to happen. Do you think that's going to roll out?
I mean, most of the analysis so far says, probably a light duty vehicle, you might be better off just look at the electric models that are coming out as well. Hydrogen seems to have its place again in those larger long haul vehicles that are being used on a constant basis. You may actually see some fleets looking at hydrogen where it does make a lot of sense. We think about all these Amazon vehicles and others, trotting around the city or over the province. And I think those companies maybe taking a good look at hydrogen. So the interesting thing is, once you've got all these vehicles on the market, at some point, what do you do with these vehicles? They won't necessarily be used by those companies longer term. So that will be introduced into the broader consumer market. And then you might start to see some faster penetration of these vehicles as well. But most from an economic perspective right now, it seems to be the focus on other parts of the economy, other parts of the transportation system. Maybe you want to buy a train. CP wants to buy a hydrogen train. So
Oh, I've heard that's coming too. Let me ask you if you can sort of bridge a gap, because I do get the sense from a portion of Albertans that they feel like these discussions about new technology and new innovations are somehow a threat to traditional industries. And what I like about the way the conversation has been broadened out is it does seem to use a lot of our existing expertise and our existing skill set, our existing engineering, to sort of take our products and our knowledge and just continue on developing in the same area. I think in the past, the way this has been framed to us by people like Green Party leader Elizabeth May was, well, I guess you can all learn how to install solar panels and install wind turbines. And that's not what I'm hearing now. I'm hearing that, yeah, we have an expertise and we have the ability to transition using that expertise. And that seems to me to be a very optimistic message, but there does still seem to be a little bit of resistance to it. So I wonder if you can just sort of, for those who are still doubters about why we even need to move in this direction, do you have an argument that you can make that might be persuasive?
Well, I mean, I just want to build on what you mentioned about the opportunities for people to move into jobs associated with the hydrogen economy. And that's why I'm so excited about it, because, you can see a fairly, clean transition from, our oil and gas experience. So, people that are involved in, the pipeline industry, people that are involved in, turbines and compressors, all those types of equipments are going to be quite valuable and needed as we move forward with hydrogen and build out this infrastructure, certainly across the hub, but longer term, across the whole economy. So, I think it's really just part of that ongoing transition. I'd like to think, 40 years ago, we produced oil and gas in a very different way than we produce today. And is that a bad thing? That's a great thing. We're much more efficient about it. We're reducing the environmental footprint associated with it. We're using new technologies, developing new skills around that. We're even bringing artificial intelligence into how we make use of, our oil and gas production. So I guess the hydrogen is a bit of an evolution. It's a significant step forward, but it's really is along a bit of a continuum. So, I think certainly there's great jobs in renewable energy as well, but, we can see opportunities to build off of that talent that we have here as we look at hydrogen. So I think that's part of the messaging moving forward is, again, not something to be fearful of. It's actually accelerated, I think, if anything, from where we maybe thought it would be, again, 10 years ago, that now we can start to make this shift. And, if we work with the trades, if we work with the colleges and start building in some of that programming, that we can see, our students start to pursue opportunities in the hydrogen economy. And it's not a great shift from what they might have been thinking about previously in oil and gas.
I'm feeling so good after talking to you today, because I do feel really optimistic. Maybe I'll get you to finish with the same question that I asked the minister and the mayor about if all goes according to plan and we do attract the investment and we do develop out this economy, what do you see the path for us being? Whether it's to 2030, which is sort of the first landmark and milestone to try to reach some of those targets, and up to 2050. I mean, do you think we're going to have difficulty reaching that? Is it going to be gloomy, or do you think there's we should have some reason for optimism?
I think we can be very optimistic. I think there'll be future forces that will impact our pace of activity and this transition. But if we look at how right now this region is being positioned, we're seeing huge interest in developing this new infrastructure that will be very valuable both domestically and for export purposes. I think I like to come back to we're a great example of how we can integrate energy systems here in Edmonton, in Alberta. We've got the CO2 storage capability. We have the oil and gas production experience will be important for bringing natural gas in to the region to convert that into hydrogen. We can manage the CO2 emissions, potentially even integrate it with renewable electricity, use energy storage technologies. So I've always felt we've got almost the best of all resources right here in Alberta, and if we can think about it as an integrated system, we can dramatically continue to reduce the environmental footprint and do this in a very efficient, optimal manner. So I think the hub is a great way to start thinking about this system, and then potentially integrating with other parts of the energy system as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the work that you do at Edmonton Global and to see how this progresses. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. I sure appreciate it.
No, thank you. Appreciated having this opportunity.
You got it. That's Brent Lakeman. So if you wanted to check them out, Edmonton Global is a municipal development fund up in Edmonton that's doing a lot of work on not only this front, but a whole variety of different ways of building out the economy. And look, guys, I know that it's been challenging, of course, for the last 10 years as Alberta has felt like it's under attack. But I honestly feel with some of the changes that have occurred at the federal level, some of the discussions that we've been having at the provincial level, that I think there's finally some recognition that all aspects of energy can play a role into the future. And I promise you, I will do some more segments on the issue of carbon capture technology and turning carbon into useful products, because to me, that is going to be the real opportunity for us. We do have a lot of CO2, but if we can capture it and turn it into a range of products and then develop a value-added chain with carbon black and carbon fiber, to me, that just ends up adding additional value to it. So I know that there's still a little bit of frustration about how we got to this point that we did, but here's what I can tell you. It seems to me that entrepreneurs, you give them a challenge and they can solve it. That's why I'm so delighted to be president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. Delighted that you joined us here today. I promise you we will do more of these. We have a plan to schedule them every Thursday. I will also be posting them on podcasts, which you can find on the Danielle Smith podcast. And thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back again at it next week. Have a good afternoon.